We are breaking into programming right now with this special report here on Dr. Phil's Merit TV.
Dr. Phil is joining us at the desk right now with a Merit TV exclusive. And Dr. Phil, thank you for joining us. This is going to be a riveting conversation.
Well, sadly it is. This is a family that I've met and come to know and have followed very, very closely, and a wonderful family. I can't tell you how close-knit they are and how devoted these parents are. Let's just jump right into it. Joining me now are Rachel and Jon Goldberg-Polin, parents of Hersh Goldberg-Polin. Rachel, Jon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Well, I'm so glad to talk to you, but I am so very sorry for the occasion, so very sorry for the reason. We all know that your son, Hersh, was abducted from the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. You saw horrific videos of him being abducted, injured during that abduction with regard to his arm. You later saw a video of him that did not seem at all like him because of the way he was speaking and the way he looked. And then a later video close to the time of what was hoped to be a release, and then finding out that in fact you had lost him. And I have sent my condolences from Robin and myself before now, but let me say to you eye to eye how very, very sorry I am that this has come to the outcome that it has. It's just tragic. I'm sorry. Jon, I don't know what to say to you, father to father. Rachel, I just, you won't hear me say I know how either of you feel because I can't know. Robin sends her love, and first off, how are you getting by day to day? What's it been like day to day since you've learned of the loss?
So as one can perhaps imagine, we are suffering. We are still in mourning 6 weeks after burying our son. I don't want to compare our grief and suffering to any other family who's going through grief and suffering of any kind. I will say, though, that just to remind your audience, and you touched on it, we had 330 days during which we knew that Hersh was taken, was critically injured, was being held captive, likely in dungeons in Gaza, and we marched around the world, meeting leaders, religious leaders, political leaders, doing everything to advocate, and we maintained our hope. Somehow, through all of it, we were optimistic that we were going to get back Hersh and the other hostages. We didn't know when, we didn't know how, but we really believed. And so to have that optimism for 330 days and then to just have it crushed by the news that he and 5 other beautiful young people were lined up and executed is a crushing blow. And we are still reeling from it, but we've made one important decision, and that is we're gonna mourn, we're gonna suffer, but we are young, we've got 2 daughters, and for ourselves, for our daughters, and because Hersh would want it this way, we are going to move on and somehow reclaim and live life.
Well, that is such a courageous attitude to take. I can tell you from a psychological perspective, you will never get over this. You will get through it. You will find a way. Inspired by Hersh, I know that you will, because I know a lot about him from what you guys have taught me and what I've learned about him. Rachel, what do you say to yourself in the middle of the night when you wake up and look at the ceiling alone, knowing that there's not another day to have hope? There's not another day to pray that it's going to come to a good end. When you wake up and know it's over, it's come to an end. What do you say to yourself in the middle of the night when you wake up to that reality?
Well, first, one of the things that is very important is for 330 days, we were in utter, constant trauma and terror, completely. And so much of that was because we knew that Hersh was in complete trauma and terror and in horrible conditions. And so there is some sort of, I don't want to call it relief, because obviously it's not relief, but knowing that he is not in the hands of people who are torturing him in truly the bowels of, I can only describe it as hell, where Hersh was, and those other 5 beautiful young people. And so, you know, I say to myself, he is no longer suffering. Now I have to figure out, how do I miss him in a way for the rest of my life that still enables me to live and to choose life? You know, there are lots of people who throughout the world who have suffered horrendous tragedies. We are now some of those people. And as Jon sort of hit upon, this will always be with us, obviously. But there is a choice of trying to navigate forward. And so I try to focus on what I truly feel, which is I actually feel that I was blessed by God for 23 years to have Hersh as my son. And I try to focus on that, on the gift of having had him when I wake up in the middle of the night. And I sometimes talk to him in the middle of the night. And I say, I know you're here. I don't know how. I don't know how to feel you this way. But you need to give your mama some love, and you need to be with me. I've said before, there are people who walked out of Auschwitz and they went forward and they had good lives. They never forgot their loved ones that they lost in Auschwitz, their spouses, their children, their siblings, their parents, but they went forward. And there are people who walked out of Auschwitz and they never left Auschwitz. And I don't want to be one of those people. I don't know where resilience comes from, but I pray for it every day. I just actually started therapy last week, which with an incredible world-known trauma therapist. I'm going back tomorrow for my second session, which, as you know, I mean, it's almost like matchmaking with, you need to have the right chemistry, the right therapist. And I'm really praying that this is a good match, because I know that all of us need help to get through this. And there's no playbook for this. This is such an unusual circumstance that we are in. And also, you know, I'd like to share with you, I don't know if you know the details, when you hear that someone was executed, I think of it as, it's almost like clean. It's like people are lined up and shot. And that's absolutely not what the scene was in this airless, completely pitch black tunnel that was 60 feet underground. There was no plumbing, no electricity. There were bottles, big bottles of urine throughout the tunnel that all of the captives, these 6 beautiful young people, had to urinate into bottles. All the urine was very dark because they were so dehydrated. They had put a bucket a little bit down this small corridor of the tunnel to use when they had to go to the bathroom, and it wasn't for urine. And Hersh was almost 6 feet tall. He was just a hair short of Jon. He was almost 6 feet tall. When we buried him, Hersh was 116 pounds. One of the girls, young women who he found with, you know, the tunnel was only 5'5". So he was standing when he was shot. This is what a forensics expert was explaining to us. He, as you know, was missing his left hand. A bullet went through his right hand, into his shoulder, into his neck, out the side of his head. He then collapsed to his knees and was shot with the gun on his head, in the back of his head, and it came out of the top of his head. He was on his knees for 2 days, frozen, with young Eden Yerushalmi, who's 24 years old, beautiful young Eden. Her head was on his side or on his lap. I mean, this was All of them were emaciated. Eden was 5'5" and she was 79 pounds. They were all completely emaciated. They were all bullet ridden. It was a complete nightmare scene. And so what also is something that's really motivating us to share this with people is we still have 101 hostages there from all different places all over the world, from 5 different religions, and we need to get these people home so that more people don't come home in body bags like Hersh.
And you believe that, based on the description that you're giving, and you know now that his body has been recovered, that he clearly had been subjected to torture all of this time, all of these 11 months, because you've been able to see the wounds all over his body and the other hostages as well. So you can only assume that this kind of torture is continuing for those that are still there. And that's why you have a sense of urgency to get these other hostages out of there now.
That's correct. Just the conditions in which they were held alone were torturous. Again, Rachel mentioned 65 feet below ground, this tunnel, 5.5 feet tall. It was just over 2 feet wide. So when the bodies were found, they also found 6 mattresses along with the 6 dead bodies. The assumption is that the mattresses would get lined up at night, head to toe, because they barely even fit one in the width of the tunnel. And again, the other telltale sign is the weights. Rachel mentioned Hersh's weight, and one of the women, one of the men we know from his family, he went in at 190 pounds. He was pulled out, his dead body, at 130 pounds. They were starving in there. So the conditions themselves were torturous. And then there's the marks that were on some of their bodies, including Hersh's. You talked about the video that came out on day 201, 129 days before we got the news that he'd been executed. In that video, we saw marks on his face. We saw signs that, as a parent, were very concerning to us. They're being tortured in there. And it's incredible that for 374 days, the world has not been able to band together and demand the release of the ones who could still be saved, including, I'll say, 13 women.
And a 1.5-year-old baby and an 86-year-old grandfather.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrific what's going on.